So my name's Nick Saville. I'm from the University of Cambridge, where I have the interesting title of the Director of Research and Thought Leadership. And I'm also, some of you may know, the manager of ALTE, the Association of Language Testers in Europe. And we have a very eminent member for the Polish language from the Jagiellonian University. So I'm pleased to see my colleagues here from that. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge our excellent interpreters and say thank you for doing the job, and apologies for not having sent my PowerPoint in advance. I'll try not to use too much jargon. You can always wave your hand if I am. I'd also like to acknowledge the contribution of my colleagues who've spoken before me today. The previous speaker we've just heard from about sensitive assessment. And I think some of the things which were said by Barry O'Sullivan and Valdek Martiniuk also tie in to what I've got to say today. And the title of my talk is, "What benefits can language testing bring to both teachers and learners?" You might think that's a bit of a tall order, but I'm going to focus in on learning. There's where we link in with the other talk. And I'm interested in how assessments can have positive impact on learning and not negative. So just by way of background, we have a big challenge. The challenge for us all is to ensure that society, and especially our education systems, equip our young people with the knowledge and skills they themselves need to fulfill their personal ambitions, and that employers need in the workplace. So the education systems, I'm talking about schooling, needs to deliver into the labour market, and what we need now are functional communication skills in several languages. This means there are what I would call real-world communication needs that language specialists like us must respond to improve outcomes and to raise proficiency standards going forward over time. Languages are increasingly seen as life skills, not just academic subjects to be learnt in school and then forgotten. And I think we all agree on that. And that's particularly true, of course, for English, as we've heard, as the lingua franca, but not only. So to address this reality is indeed very challenging for policymakers. And the extent of the challenge was flagged up by the results of the European Survey on Language Competencies. This survey, which used language tests in 5 languages, reported 3 years ago in 2012, and it highlighted the gap between the real needs of society and the outcomes in relation to those 5 main languages as taught across Europe, most widely taught across Europe. And evidence from that report, which wasn't complete, however, suggested that language learning, which takes place during formal schooling, does not enable learners to reach the proficiency levels needed in society, especially by the labour market. And this next slide, which is taken from the report or summarize it, shows the problem. The percentage of learners by the time they reach 16 getting to the B levels is only 42%, which means that more than half are not getting anywhere near it. And when it comes to a second language, that's only 25%. So testing has helped reveal the problem. What about whether it can help us address the problem? So we know that despite the many reforms, therefore, that go on across education systems, there still doesn't seem to be enough time available in school classrooms for our children to make the necessary progress by the time they leave school. And I think nothing has changed in the last 3 years. So the problem still exists. Here are 3 recommendations that came out of the report, which are difficult to disagree with. Language competencies need to be significantly improved across the 4 language skills. And educational systems must step up their efforts to prepare all users, not just that 40% who are getting to reasonable levels. linguistic diversity remains important for culture and personal reasons, and this, of course, complicates the problem because it's not just about teaching one language. And here's the most relevant part for my talk, which I'm going to pick up on. Language policies should address the creation of language-friendly living and learning environments. I highlighted that bit in red. So, if you like, the take-home message today is that assessment and testing specialists can, I believe, play a much more powerful role, an influencing role in addressing all of these points, but especially this last one, this last bullet point. And picking up, I think, again on what Barry said, the new challenge for us as assessment providers is to help link school learning with wider society, including learning that can take place in the home with families, in the workplace, and in other environments of context where learning can happen. In other words, I think what we need to do is to link all types of assessment, and we've heard about several today, into a coherent model to improve the learning processes and the learning outcomes. So in the previous talk, we heard about the process of sensitive assessment to help learning. So it's picking up on that idea. And again, this is not straightforward, of course. And a recent survey, which I've been involved in, again, on behalf of the European Commission, on national assessment systems, and this will be published on Friday for the Day of Languages in Brussels, has, I think, shown up that if we want to increase the positive impact from assessment, we will have to work quite hard on our national education assessments themselves, because testing, as we know, has very powerful impacts on learning. And if the tests are not working in the right way, then the learning won't be happening in the right way. And I think we're going to hear a bit more about what's going on in national assessment systems in Europe this afternoon from our colleague from the Eurydice Network. So there'll be another link there. But in the rest of my talk, I'm going to suggest a few things which I think are the way forward. So the challenge for assessment providers, this is a summary. We could read it off the slide. To link high-stakes certificated exams into a systemic relationship with formative types of assessment which occur in classrooms and in other learning environments, so extending the idea of the classroom outside as well as inside schools. To expand the time available both for doing the learning but also for monitoring the progress. So I will be suggesting, I think, that we need to adopt what I'm calling a learning-oriented approach that locates learning at the heart of all our assessment contexts, including classroom-based assessment, progress testing, peer assessment, self-assessment, and of course the high-stakes exams we're all familiar with. On the one hand, we must enable international standards to be met and hopefully raised over time, as evidenced, for example, by international certification. On the other hand, we must empower teachers and learners to set their own individualized goals, to monitor their performance, and to make informed decisions about the next steps learners need to take to make the necessary progress up the so-called learning ladder. And again, as Barry said, teaching, learning, and assessment must be better aligned to the same sets of goals and therefore to each other more effectively. This means, I think, we must define complementary roles for the expertise of teachers and the expertise of assessment specialists like myself and the colleagues you've heard talking today. And just a preamble to that, though, a key point that we can all, I think, begin to address is that learning stages must be coherent as progression. And if you think about educational systems, quite often that doesn't happen. We're now talking about elementary school learning of languages, perhaps even kindergarten. junior school, high school, senior school, onto the workplace in education. So that must be about progression, and we have to support that effectively. What we don't want is every time you change a school is you go back to the beginning. So this is sort of indicating that that might happen. What we want to do is to take people up the stages of learning so that what you create is a kind of step ladder or way of climbing to where you need to be. And I think we need to collaborate together to ensure that that happens. This is not straightforward, but I think we can do that. And also we can begin to pick up on the idea of the language-friendly living and learning environments, and to relate our policy goals to concrete action so that we can help to ensure that the action is implemented in society and not just in school. So the point here is that I think an important step in bringing the different types of assessment into alignment is that there are two key aspects. First of all, to ensure that all types of assessment focus on the same goals, that they can be coherent and pull in the same direction. Secondly, that they report performance in terms of the same interpretive framework, the learning ladder or the common standards, so that we can have the conversation. And I think this strongly endorses the use of the CFR, which I think currently provides a tool, doesn't provide all the answers, to addressing these aspects. A common understanding of learning goals, which can be, as we've heard, continually addressed and adapted, for example, with new can-do statements we're hearing about today, and a scale that helps understanding of performance across levels, like in this slide. And indeed, I think, it's not just in Europe that the CFR is having this function. It's now becoming the common framework of reference, and we see it in Asia and in Latin America as well. So, linking testing and teaching expertise. Large-scale language assessment is one dimension of this learning landscape, describing progression like this, in what I'd call the vertical dimension, where you can place learners accurately and reliably on a scale. You can do so with regard to different skills, and you can come up with a profile. And indeed, one of the things I'd say is we have to make sure we address all of those skills, not just reading or grammar-based learning. And we can use a framework to help us do that. That's traditionally the dimension of assessment providers like Cambridge and others that do this sort of stuff and have the expertise in psychometrics. This needs to be complemented by another dimension, which is on this diagram horizontal, which allows us to address the individualization of learners and the role of teachers in addressing the specific needs of learners who are at the same approximate level, but all have different interests. They have different cognition, different past experience, different motivations, and different goals in their own learning space. So this is, the realm of the teacher, the sensitive teaching, the sensitive testing. So how do we bring these two things into an alignment? This is the challenge, I think. And one of the things I've just been talking to colleagues about, and it ties in with the idea of technology, is how do we extend this discussion beyond the classroom? And some people have been talking about the flipped classroom, where things that go on in the class are not just the input from the teacher, but they link in to things that go on outside of the classroom, and particularly where that activity can be mediated by some form of technology. Such approaches to learning present, I think, opportunities to use online systems which are capable of creating virtual learning environments, enabling interactions which are necessary for learning, learner to learner, learner to teacher, and so forth, and can introduce a degree of adaptivity which then can address individual learner needs. And of course, assessment can be integrated into this. So I don't know how far down the line on Barry's time chart, but I think this is something we can begin to do in the next few years. So it's not all out there in the distant future. Here's if assessment is about giving feedback on learning, which I think it is, then you can see how you can have activities which are based around learning tasks, which can be done before the class, in the class, and after the task, which can integrate various forms of assessment, sometimes done by the teacher, sometimes done by the learners themselves, and sometimes done by psychometric tools like tests or standardized assessments. So what I'm trying to create here is the idea of an ecology for learning, a joined up way of thinking about learning. And in this picture, which I've drawn with a colleague of mine at work, we conceive of this as 4 different worlds which have to be linked together. You have the personal world, which is the target of what we're doing, which is the learner and her internal cognition and her personal characteristics, strategies, knowledge, competencies, motivations, and so forth, which are really essential for learning. Then we have the social world, which is where the outcomes of learning are used and valued, for example, in the workplace, but also where learners need to actually recognize that they need to use their developing skills. It's not just about using language in the classroom. It's actually about transferring that language. And it's only if you can do that that you learn, and learn effectively and fast enough to reach the levels. This needs to tie in, of course, with the educational policies, which are set through, as curriculum and syllabi, and materials and so forth, which governments take responsibility for and help to. Their job is to help the learners and provide the teachers. And I put assessment there as a separate world in these 4 worlds that I've drawn here. I've shown it separately because assessment, I think, and this is a key point, can provide learners and teachers with the necessary evidence of progression, and ultimately, finally, with the valid and reliable accreditation of learning in the form of qualifications, certificates, that are going to be used in the social context. So it's linking up this into a systemic model, which is at the heart of my talk. At the heart of the model, of course, is learning and tasks which focus on learning, which need interaction and feedback being a form of results from testing or from formative types of assessment. And what we're trying to do is to enhance what goes on in classrooms with formal learning, with how to take that beyond the classroom to encourage learning which is more akin to natural language acquisition. So the next slide sort of summarizes some of the key aspects of this model when brought together into a framework, an ecological model, which requires us to have the frame of reference, the level system, some agreement about the shared goals in the curriculum, some understanding of what sorts of tasks, whether in the classroom or elsewhere, can actually develop learning in the right way, how to keep records of that and to provide feedback, and how to link that in to real-world relevant assessments which are going to be used in the workplace or in higher education. And I think this systemic approach is the way forward in raising standards. And above all, I think it will be the transformative uses of digital technology, particularly mobile devices, not the ones which are nailed to the desk like in language labs, that will create the necessary ecology for improving language outcomes. And I do believe that we will begin to see innovative types of assessment of the kind which move beyond the ones we saw, dating back to the age of the imperial Chinese exam. And for example, we can see the learner at the center of a cloud-based learning system where the learner has a device, a tablet, a PC, an iPhone, whatever it might be, and takes part in face-to-face classroom activities. But that learner is then linked in with a universe of possibilities that go beyond that through the internet. So I would come back, however, to I said this would also involve teachers, not learners. I think teachers will not become redundant as the technology develops. What we will see is that they will have to learn new knowledge and skills and behaviors, not the kind that Barry was talking about with ticking boxes, but interacting in a more productive way with the technology, creating new opportunities and tasks for learning. But they will also have to understand more about assessment, how to make assessments, how to give feedback, how to structure their comments or their the results from what comes out of their classrooms to focus on learning, not just to give outcomes. And to do that, they will need higher levels of what we're calling assessment literacy. But that's a topic for another day. So thank you for listening.